Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Essays on Abolition, where I read from the collection of essays put together by Colin Kaepernick's publishing company about the abolition of police, the abolition of prisons, and or reforms thereto, complaints thereof, and so on. I hope everyone's having a good day so far. It is Tuesday. I'm doing this on a Tuesday when I usually wouldn't because I'm handing off Lords of the Night duties to Monkey tonight. I'll be switching off with him and doing Wednesday instead, just because I have things going on at my apartment that will probably bleed into my time and ability to host the show tonight. So there's that. But just thought I'd add a little something to the playlist and further my understanding, if that is possible, of the arguments regarding the abolition of police and or prisons. And I think today's article has something to do with police by its title, The Myth of the Good Cop. We'll get into that momentarily, but first, hello to those of you that have decided to join me today. Wade Waleson, Tony Giff, Ziggy Yaterwery. And if that's a real name and I just butchered that, I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. Raziel, Mr. No, Asian Hippie, Keeverdam, Zalba, St. Michael, Black Belt for Christ, Eric Grunstatter, Spiro Girl, No Name, Red Fawn. Thank you, this is Kyle. Hello, chat people and scribbles. Hello, Kyle. Check Your Logic, Decode, J2020. No One, Nowhere. Hello. Mr. No, so it is a live stream. What'd you think it was going to be? Not a premiere. I can't recall that I've ever actually done a premiere. Maybe someday. Regardless, let's get into this this one because I don't know what it means. The Myth of the Good Cop. And this is pop culture helped turn police officers into rock stars and black folks into criminals. Exploring how propaganda empowers law enforcement to terrorize with impunity. Okay, and this is by Mark Anthony Neal. I have no idea who that is. Maybe they'll tell us at the end. All right, so let us begin. If you're of a certain age, the last of the boomers or the first cohort of Generation X, and grew up black and urban, you may have a tendency to romanticize the cops who used to walk the beat, the boys in blue who knew everyone in the neighborhood. Truth be told, the officers I most remember from my years growing up in the South Bronx were white do-gooders that appeared on TV in the 1970s. Back then, I was oblivious to the criminalization of black bodies, the anti-black violence that was propagated by the law enforcement community writ large, or the ideological framing about who and what police were. The ideological framing about who and what the police were. I'm going to keep that notion in mind. I was unaware of the propaganda that pop culture had served up to an unsuspecting public for generations. Propaganda, the reproduction and circulation in mainstream media of propaganda that is favorable to law enforcement, has long been a tool to disrupt legitimate claims of anti-black violence. Simply put, propaganda actively counters attempts to hold police malfeasance accountable by reinforcing the ideas that the police are generally fair and hardworking and that black criminals deserve the brutal treatment they receive. Such cultural framing has been critical to buttressing the need for a more expansive criminal justice system that fuels mass incarceration. Okay. When I was a kid, my father worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. He spent his downtime listening to gospel quartets and watching police and private detective dramas that played in the NBC mystery movie programming rotation. Shows like McMillan and Wife, McCloud, and Columbo. I suppose that my father, a black, undereducated, working-class man from the South, was drawn to the kind of folksy, down-home characters featured in these shows, in part because he found them to be comforting as examples of respectability that would be available to his young son. The shows were often comical and pivoted on innocuous notions of morality, where good always won out over bad. The criminals were rarely evil on 1970s television in the ways that so-called Middle Eastern terrorists were portrayed in the 1980s. McLeod, for example, was a fish-out-of-water detective from the Southwest who brought his style of policing to the big city. He'd often chase criminals on horseback. Columbo, which aired intermittently for more than 3 decades, hinged on the genius of a dusty, rumpled gumshoe who constantly looked as if he'd just fallen out of bed to solve a case. While those shows endeared law enforcement to the public, other programming from the era was more intentional in its messaging. Another staple on my dad's television was The FBI, a show that saw actor Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., a Goldwater Republican. Not quite sure what his political affiliations have to do with anything, but okay. Acting out scripts vetted by the actual FBI, which in real life was laying waste to a generation of black freedom fighters and their organizations. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover architected COINTELPRO, which used various forms of disruption, including infiltration and violence, to undermine civil rights, anti-war, native, and white radical organizations. Oh, white radical organizations, you say? So J. Edgar Hoover was pretty much just a control freak across the board, regardless of who you were, if you were going against the grain. Okay. Hoover famously identified the Black Panther Party as the biggest threat to American society. The FBI was monumental in swaying the public at a time when law and order was a rallying cry. Well, I didn't grow up in that era, so I can't say about the impact of the show The FBI, but okay. I also enjoyed watching the short-lived series SWAT, the inspiration for the 2003 Samuel L. Jackson film of the same name. I actually saw that movie. It was as a movie, and syndicated episodes of Adam 12, both of which were set in Los Angeles. No more than 10 or 11 years old at the time, I fancied myself as SWAT's Dominic Luca, Mark Shera, and rookie officer Jim Reed, Kent McCord, from Adam 12. Little did I know that the SWAT, Special Weapons and Tactics Unit, had been designed in the mid-1960s by Los Angeles Police Department Inspector Daryl Gates in the aftermath of the Watts riots in 1965. So with that knowledge after the fact, your fascination and or love for the idea of SWAT became less? Okay. Intended as the police force's militarized arm that could address criminal situations that needed quick and potentially violent resolution, such as snipers and the taking of hostages, SWAT teams became a means to address urban protest. Well, I'm sure they were used in such situations, but like you said, that's not what they were initially created for. Not surprisingly, one of the first uses of SWAT was an attack on the Black Panther Party's LA headquarters in December 1969, in which more than 300 officers took on 13 Black Panther members, more than half of whom were women and children. The attack occurred only days after a similar police raid in Chicago that killed Fred Hampton and Mark Clark in what poet Husky Madhubuti called a one-sided shootout. Both incidents highlight the close relationship between local law enforcement and the FBI in the period. Okay, well, what were I've heard of the Fred Hampton shooting. I don't know the circumstances of your first example. An attack, like unprovoked? The SWAT team just showed up? Or I don't know. But in the absence of context, I continue. The show Adam 12 featured the Rampart Division of the LAPD, which 2 decades after the show's debut would become the basis of a police corruption case involving the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums unit. So a TV show and something that happened 20 years after it came out. Okay. Also conceived of by Gates, Crash, that was the Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, Crash intimately connected to the police brutality narratives heard in gangster rap of the late 1980s and 1990s in songs like Toddy T's Betterum and NWA's Fuck the Police. In the case of Crash, the narrative of urban radicals had shifted to concerns about the war on drugs during an era when crack cocaine was being introduced to black and brown urban communities. Aside from the examples in rap music, most Americans were unaware of these efforts until the release of the 1988 film Colors, in which Robert Duvall and Sean Penn portrayed Crash officers. Okay. The irony was that the affable Dominic Luca and Jim Reed of the shows SWAT and Adam 12, respectively, were the public faces of the LAPD in an era in which its figureheads like Gates, who became the very symbol of racist policing in the post-civil rights era, were creating apparatuses that would have dramatic and traumatic impacts on black communities for decades. SWAT and Adam 12 were the faces of the LAPD. Okay. These contradictory realities speak to how palpable propaganda was as a resource to influence public opinion and thus public policy regarding law enforcement. I guess they're realities only because you tell me they are. I have no idea how relevant or how impactful SWAT or Adam 12 had on the public relations of the LAPD. I'll just have to take your word for it, I guess. Or what that has to do with anybody living anywhere else in the country. But, okay. With the exception of the ensemble cast of the sitcom Barney Miller and the melodrama Hill Street Blues, black officers were largely missing as primary characters in the narratives of the 70s and 80s. Barney Miller and Hill Street Blues were big shows. My parents watched those all the time. Largely missing, okay. A dearth that reflected the lack of diversity in station houses in the period. Was it an accurate reflection of reality? I don't know. Charles Barnett's 1994 film, The Glass Shield, for example, fictionalized a real-life attempt to integrate a Los Angeles area sheriff's office. Black novelists filled in the gaps, though. Okay. Chester Himes' Harlem Detective series featured Gravedigger Jones and Coffin Ed Johnson, two detectives who became more prominent when they were depicted by Godfrey Cambridge and Raymond St. Jacques, respectively, in 1970s Ossie Davis-directed film Cotton Comes to Harlem and Come Back, Charleston Blue 2 years later. Okay. In Raymond Nelson's 1972 essay on Himes' detective novels, he describes Gravedigger and Coffin Ed as bad N-words. And I only say N-words because I don't know what YouTube does to videos that say otherwise. Symbols of defiance, strength, and masculinity to a community that had been forced to learn, or at least to shame, weakness, and compliance, unquote. And indeed, on screen, Cambridge and St. Jacques' performances of the duo were given the gravitas of race men. These figures, often men within black life and culture who were committed to the race, they didn't simply acquiesce to the white power structure that employed them, also offered a healthy skepticism of ghetto hustlers while using their badges and relative privilege to look out for the least of in Black Harlem. Excuse me a moment. Okay. The extent to which Gravedigger and Coffin Ed were depicted as being embedded in the very fabric of Black Harlem was a refreshing counter to the drive-by treatments of black life found in most film and television in the era, particularly with regards to law enforcement. Okay. And then we jump down to a couple of examples that fall within sort of my cognizance of propaganda, if that's what this is now. Let's see. The 1991 film A Rage in Harlem, a third of Himes' detective novels to be adapted for the big screen, found Gravedigger and Coffin Ed on the periphery of the film's focus, as if it were a metaphor for the cultural shifts that had seemingly occurred in the previous 2 decades. In many ways, Gravedigger and Coffin Ed were precursors to the black-white buddy cop films of the 1980s. Think Danny Glover and Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon, or 48 Hours, in which Eddie Murphy played a petty criminal working with a detective. You're not going to bring up Running Scared? Okay. Whereas the idea of cop buddy films with 2 black actors were not tenable to Hollywood at the time, and would not be until the Bad Boys franchise. Buddy cop films, I thought you just said that there were a couple. Okay, maybe I'm missing something. The black-white buddy cop films were more marketable given the success of films like Defiant Ones, Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis, and the Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder films of the 1970s and 80s. Okay, well, so far you've described a decade-by-decade gradual cultural shift into the popular idea of what constitutes, fictionalized police work. Okay, so where are we going with this? Notable about these films, including the Bad Boys franchise with Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, is the way that black officers were largely evacuated from black life and community. Okay. Though Glover played a family man in Lethal Weapon, there was nothing inherently black about his life. I'm going to read that again, just for reference's sake. I don't know. Though Glover played a family man in Lethal Weapon, there was nothing inherently black about his life. In fact, Gibson played the role of the rogue cop. Okay. This could also be seen in the television series NYPD Blue, where James McDaniels portrayed Lieutenant Arthur Fancy for the series' first 8 seasons, yet there was little attention to his life outside of the precinct. Okay, I never watched that show. And there's lots of characters and lots of shows whose backstories and regular lives are not detailed. The Law and Order franchise reveals little about the backstory of numerous black officers played by the likes of Jesse L. Martin, Anthony Anderson, and Ice-T, who has portrayed Sergeant Odafin Finn Tutula for nearly 20 years. You ever watch Law and Order? You know how often their personal lives ever became part of the storyline, except in reference? How many ex-wives Lenny Briscoe had? Or the family issues of, excuse me, the family issues of Ray Curtis and so on. That the focus was not on the characters' personal lives. The focus was on the case at hand. You know, and their personal lives only really ever intersected with the storyline if it was relevant as avatars of perspective on the situation or the circumstances. It wasn't just black characters. It was all characters. Did you ever find out the personal life of Ben Stone, the first ADA in Law and Order? No, not really. Come on. Okay, because now our author is getting into territory that I have at least some working knowledge of, and that's nonsense. The Law and Order franchise reveals little about the backstory of numerous characters. Doesn't matter what their skin color is, numerous characters. But okay. The aforementioned fictional officers exist in contrast to Boys in the Hood's Officer Coffee, a black cop, excuse me, played by Jesse Lawrence Ferguson. Excuse me a second while I cough. Need to clear my throat there for a second. And I don't even know if it worked. Played by Jesse Lawrence Ferguson, whose disdain for black youth is palpable. Okay, well, that was the character that he played. Okay. Denzel Washington's Oscar-winning performance as Alonzo Harris in Training Day is yet another example of a character who is allowed to rain terror on a black community due to the faulty logic of black-on-black crime and the benign neglect directed toward poor and working-class communities of color that renders those communities as complicit in their own pathologies. In such instances, it seems blacks and others do not deserve to be protected and served. Did you see the end of Training Day by any chance? You see that whole part where finally Alonzo is given his comeuppance and the community says, to hell with this guy? You see that part? Did you see the movie? Did you see the other police officers involved in Alonzo's conspiracy? Did you see that? I don't know if you saw that. Okay. Again, something that I have some passing familiarity with. That such characters were featured in films by black directors, John Singleton and Antoine Fuqua, respectively, doesn't change the fact that in much of popular culture, black officers are no longer race men at all, but rather stand-ins for the very anti-black violence directed at black communities. So Jesse L. Green, as you said earlier in Law and Order, or sorry, Jesse L. Martin plays Green. That character, the Bad Boys character, okay, all right. Okay. As a whole, these characters are complements to the purposes of propaganda. Sorry, my brain keeps wanting to say propaganda, which I think is the point. I'll start over. As a whole, these characters are complements to the purposes of propaganda, serving as examples of black exceptionalism on the one hand, while suggesting that policing is race neutral, but criminality is not. I am really reaching to think of an instance of Columbo where the criminal he went after was anyone other than white. But okay. Yet the more things change, the more they stay the same. Those beat cops on Adam 12 that I once idolized as a kid now sit comfortably around the Sunday dinner table as 3 generations of officers on the police drama Blue Bloods. Thoughtful, introspective, and devoted to God, family, and the law. Who wouldn't want them to protect and serve? And that's the end of the article. Okay, so aside from mischaracterizing at least one movie and one TV franchise that I have some familiarity with, and these characters, but they were the wrong race and they projected the wrong idea, and every episode was a white cop taking down a black criminal or something. I don't know. What? I'll come back down to the Training Day one again, and I don't mean to repeat myself, but I guess I do mean to repeat myself. I was going to say it again, but that's the one example out of this that just makes me go, huh? Let me read that little bit again. Denzel Washington's Oscar-winning performance as Alonzo Harris in Training Day is yet another example of a character who is allowed to rain terror on a black community due to the faulty logic of black-on-black crime and the benign neglect directed toward poor and working-class communities of color that renders those communities as complicit in their own pathologies. In such instances, it seems blacks and others do not deserve to be protected and served. Okay. Alonzo Harris was a monster. Okay. He got what was coming to him at the end, and he was turned on by the quote-unquote very community he lived amongst, same color as him for the most part, because he was a bully, and people finally saw they could stand up to him because he was, the emperor had no clothes. And his trainee kind of turned around and walked away. And they took the power back from the bully, the guy who'd been abusing and taking advantage of people of all stripes the entire movie. He was the villain. He's not supposed to be elevated as a cop. He was... What? Oh, okay. All right. Okay. I mean, Alonzo Harris represents, as a character, all the conspiracy theories we're hearing in these articles about the police, that they are power hungry, that they are jackbooted thugs, that they take advantage of the communities, etc., etc. And in that movie, Alonzo Harris has a team of other officers who are mostly white, doing the same thing, being corrupt cops. And they get what's coming to them in the end. Because, functionally speaking, it's not about race, it was about character. But, okay, there you go, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, what did I take away from this? I guess I should do something like that, because... I'm not sure. TV shows don't reflect reality. Movies don't reflect reality, necessarily. But at the same time, our authors showed us, by example after example after example, a dramatic, cultural, and at least artistic and or Hollywood shift in the view on policing, or the view on action movies, or the view on police procedurals. I mean, Law and Order is an amazing example to bring up, since from the beginning of that show, you had a progression, a revolving cast, both of a black assistant district attorney, and then a black police chief, and then several police officers who weren't white, and on and on and on. And of course, a lot of the stories and a lot of the storylines and cases involved touched on race relations and onward from the 90s up until today. I mean, a very sort of, and of course, Law and Order specifically was responding to news stories that happened in the real world. You know, the ads for Law and Order was always something to the effect of ripped from the headlines. because they were addressing the news of the day or situations that had occurred and examining them from a fictional perspective, done up quite a bit. But I don't know what the author was saying here. He's disappointed that the TV shows he watched as a kid were based on the ideas or the suggestions of a terrible police chief in Los Angeles, that black characters as police officers or law enforcement aren't the way he wants them to be. I don't know. And that one comment about Danny Glover, though Glover played a family man in Lethal Weapon, there was nothing inherently black about his life. I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Nothing inherently black. What defines black about someone's life if they're living their life? What does it mean? And then in parentheses right after, he says, in fact, Gibson played the role of the rogue cop. So if Danny Glover had been playing the rogue cop, would that have been more of a black life? I don't know what that means. I don't know how to interpret that otherwise. This is so bizarre. Thank you, Pecoraro, the driving man, the foot-tapping closeted senator, for example. Oh, God. I forgot about that guy. What about him? You mean the criminal? What are you talking about? Sorry, my brain's in 3 different places at once, Pecoraro. I remember that guy. God, what was his name? I remember his appearance. He was bald, and he was a white bald guy with glasses, and he looked really awkward. Oh, I forgot about that story. Let's see. Kieverdam says nothing oppressed, urban or ghetto. I guess. I mean, I don't want to fall back onto any stereotypes that I'm not having suggested to me here, but I don't know how else to interpret what the author said. He did not live a black life. Okay. Mr. No says, Scribelite, I take it he hasn't seen Lethal Weapon 2. I don't know. Big College Driving, that was the premise of my most memorable episode. Oh, did they take that? Oh, they take that episode or that case, the toe-tapping senator? Yeah. Law and Order was great. I mean, I haven't watched Law and Order in years, but like original Law and Order series stuff all the way through. I mean, I kind of stopped watching with any regularity after McCoy. Once McCoy disappeared, everything seemed kind of, I don't know. I also stopped watching. I stopped having cable around that time too, so that might be the other reason. But yeah, classic Law and Order was great. And as far as like non-white police fictional figures, I just have to think back to Cops, not the TV show, the reality show, but COPS, Fighting Crime in a Future Time. Look up that cartoon, COPS, periods in there, Fighting Crime in a Future Time. That was I think that was probably the first thing I ever watched that was police centric as a kid that I paid attention to, at least partially. After that, of course, it was the TV show Cops because my dad loves that show. But otherwise, guys, I'll take any comments or questions or anything else you guys might have real quick, and then I'll wrap this up because I got to get back to work, unfortunately. Master Roshi, well, Scribe, Danny Glover was a man with a wife, kids, and a steady job, so read into that what is not black about that for yourself. Again, I don't know what the author means. I don't know what he means. What does he mean? Danny Glover, as a family man, was not living a black life, and yet Mel Gibson actually played the rogue cop. Like, should those have been reversed? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. Let's see. Zio Gold, does the author think that a black person that doesn't speak with a lot of slang and act like a stereotype isn't living a black life? Again, I don't know. I can only guess because he did not explain himself. So I don't know. Let's see. Zizzy Aderwari says, inherently black sounds racist. It sounds definitely expective, stereotypical type stuff, like, he's not acting like I expect he should since he's this color or something. That's the only way I can take it. But without further definition, I don't know how else to say it. Kyler, the last couple seasons of Law and Order were meh. Yeah, I don't know what changed. The couple that I did watch post McCoy era when they had all the other characters that I didn't recognize so much, and Fred Thompson was in there for a while. It just didn't feel the same. It didn't have the same oomph to it. I don't know. Maybe I was burnt out at that point or something. But no, Briscoe and Curtis. I thought, the team ups. The key to all of those shows was the chemistry of the two cops. If the chemistry of the two cops didn't work, everything else kind of fell apart, because you could get in all the serious technical stuff with the lawyers, and that was fine, and they could be all serious and everything. But if the chemistry between the two cops didn't make any sense, it didn't work. So Soretta and Logan, I thought was great. Briscoe and Logan were great. Briscoe and Curtis were great. Briscoe and Green were great too. I think it was around the time that the guy who plays Briscoe, who I suddenly forget his name, he passed away, that I kind of stopped watching that show. It didn't really click anymore. So, wait, was it Curtis and Green? Was Briscoe and Green ever a partnership? Maybe I'm misremembering. Anyway, I'm going off on different directions here, guys. I think I've said enough. Some emulation, Briscoe County Jr. No, that was a completely different thing with a black cowboy, by the way. Partner black cowboy. Let's see. And Master Roshi, these people must be trolling us at this point. Their lack of insight is just too much to bear. Well, again, this is another entry into the Abolition for the People essay series. And after reading this, if I did not have the preamble that this was part of that series and I just read it flatly, I wouldn't have any notion in here that there's any argument for the abolition of police. And in fact, I'm not quite sure there was an argument in here at all. I mean, what is the author suggesting? That police depicted in films and movies need to do what? Or they should be doing or portrayed as what? There was so little context to the faults in the more modern representations that I'm not quite sure what the solutions were to any problems cited. All I basically saw here was someone who has watched the evolution of cop shows and cop movies over the years and is still unhappy with them. But of course, he's only unhappy with the ones he watched as a kid after he found out about the reality that was tangentially attached to some of those shows. Then they were bad things, even though he idolized them as a child. And now he likes Blue Bloods, or doesn't. I'm not sure. But we have what we are presented with. So with that, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found it somewhat informative. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it myself. I will think about it after we're done here. If you would like to hear more from me or the Ranting Monkey or Satsu 2 Cents, you can find all three of us tonight on the Ranting Monkeys channel, special time for a Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. I should say special location for tonight, not special time. 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for Lords of the Night, where we will talk about the news of the day, news stories you submit, what we've been up to on the internet, and then your questions and comments. I will be hosting the show again tomorrow night, Wednesday night, switching off with Monkey. And I'll probably be doing a TED Excellence on, well, actually, it'll probably be Saturday now, because Thursday's all taken up with Thanksgiving. I'll be hanging out with my sister for that. But regardless, I hope you're all well. Hope you all have a good rest of your Tuesday. If I don't see you before then, I hope everyone who does celebrate it or will be doing so has a great and fruitful Thanksgiving. And other than that, everyone, that's it. That's the end of the show. So I guess I'll just end it here. Bye-bye.